We're gonna learn about South African lore. South African lore. We're gonna learn about the Great Trek. Not Star Trek, not Goon Trek, the Great Trek.
The Great Trek, or Die Groot Trek in Afrikaans, was a large-scale movement of Dutch-speaking settlers whose ancestors had migrated to the Cape of Good Hope from the 17th century. Thousands, perhaps even a tenth of the Cape's white population, packed all their belongings into wagons and pushed them into the interior
Now you guys have the Oregon Trail. We've got the Great Trek.
between 1835 and 1840. Now, before I go on, I'd like to cover some of the context. If you want to skip ahead to when I actually start talking about the Great Trek, then check the description for the time.
Nope.
On the 6th of
I'm listening
April
to the whole thing.
1652, the Dutch East India Company's Jan van Riebeek founded
Ah yes, Jan van Riebeek. Mine ancestor.
the city of Cape Town, named Kaapstad, 50 miles to the north of Table
What is this Kaapstad? It's Kaapstad.
Bay. Cape Town was used by VOC merchants as a way station for Dutch ships, both going to and returning from the Dutch East Indies.
True,
As time went
factual.
on, more and more retired VOC members began
I actually almost thought that this was one of those double-headed cows from Fallout.
settling around the city, some of whom worked on the land as farmers and would become known by the Dutch word Boer, which
Wow, this is like one of the only people that can actually pronounce that right.
means farmer. In 1814, when the Netherlands was
Most people say Boer. It's not. It's Boer.
part of the French Empire under Napoleon, the Cape Colony was invaded by the British Army, and it passed to the jurisdiction of the British South Africa Company. The older Dutch population and the new migrants from Britain didn't get along well, and the Dutch complained. The older Dutch
hold on, I wanna read
population and the new migrants
That would be marvelous, Sir Hugh, old
from
boy.
Britain didn't
Bliksem met hierdie idee.
get along well, and
Ja, besblik.
the Dutch complained that the British weren't doing enough when their farms and families
Where are the British police when you need them? Yep. That same question can be asked about the British police in year 2025. Paintings of a beef burger? Yes.
were being attacked by the local Xhosa tribe. They were horrified when slavery was abolished and their farmhands were taken away without compensation by the British authorities. The situation reached boiling point when the British outlawed Dutch as an administrative language. In the meantime, there was not only the grandchildren of Dutch colonists living on the farms outside the city, but also French Huguenots, immigrants and
Yep, so the French Huguenots, they formed about 10% of the Boer population. Not that every Boer is 10% French, but 10% of the Boers are from these Huguenot French.
refugees from the German states.
That's me, boys. That's me. That's right here. That's mine ancestor.
And mixed race people with European, African and Asian ancestors. Before long, these groups amalgamated under the new racial identity of the Voortrekker, speaking some form of Dutch, which would later develop into Afrikaans. Their disdain for British rule was what binded them together. Many of them were humble
It's bound.
farmers who earned their living through small crop cultivation and cattle rearing on their plaas, the Afrikaans
Plaas means farm, by the way, guys.
word for farm.
Oh, he actually mentioned it. Oh, my bad. I'm sorry. Ex farm.
Some of these became known as trekboeren, literally meaning sort of
So that means I am Uncle Fawn.
wandering farmers in Dutch. Even
Ooh, hold up. Map. Damn, it's so weird seeing a map of South Africa and it's all European names. Zierberg, Orange River, Celadon, Stormberg, which means Storm Mountain for the uneducated. Bosjesmans, Gamtoos, Plettenberg Bay, Brede River, Cape Town, Stellenbosch. We still have Stellenbosch today. Olifants means elephants. The Zout River, Great Karoo. Cool stuff.
before the British occupation of the Cape in 1814, they had attempted to escape the administration of the Dutch East India Company to start an independent Boer republic further inland. It must have been a very difficult decision for the Boers to decide whether or not to pack all their belongings into a covered wagon and leave their old life behind. Indeed, most people of Dutch descent in the Cape stayed where they were. The way into the interior was filled with dangers that the Boers would have to overcome on the journey.
Yeah. Like, very loud woman. true danger. Ask my chat.
The two great rivers of South Africa, the Orange River and the Vaal, meandered across the landscape and were strewn directly across the Voortrekker's path. On the other side lay the Kalahari in the northwest, and in the northeast were the mosquito-infested swamps of the Limpopo River Delta.
Dude, I hate mosquitoes. Or as they call them, mozzies down here.
Limpopo lies on the southern extent of the Tsetse fly belt, meaning if someone is bitten there, they're liable to catch malaria.
That is true. That is why when you take flights up to Limpopo, it's very much advised. I don't know if it's required, but it's very much advised that you take medication to prevent this.
Even before the Voortrekkers could worry about these dangers, they would have to traverse the mountain range called the Great Escarpment. The lay of the land wasn't the only thing standing between the Voortrekkers and their goal. The mountains, the plains, and the coast of Africa were full of hostile African tribes who would stop at nothing to keep the whites out of their land. The Boers were already familiar with the warriors of the Xhosa, who had raided
Oh, okay, hold on, let me help you out there. It's called Xhosa.
their farmsteads on the Eastern Cape for several years. The warlike Zulus were infamous because, unlike the other tribes of the south, they slaughtered women and children along with the men. The
Yeah, they were pretty violent when it came to warfare, and just culturally in general.
Zulus lived inland from the eastern coast to the south of where the Swazis of Swaziland called home. The Sotho and their cousins the Lesotho, for whom
It's Sutu.
the modern
If I'm
country
not
is
mistaken.
named, lived further into the interior.
Yeah, it is Sutu, because that is Lesotho.
The Ndebele or Matabele were a breakaway Zulu tribe who had carved out a kingdom for themselves in the country now called Zimbabwe, or Zimbabwe probably in English. Dutch pronunciation. The period of great unrest between 1815 and the start of the Great Trek was a time of incessant war and horror for the Africans of the southeast. In the Zulu language, it is known as the Mafekane,
Is there a Labubu tribe? No, we're safe from that cancer.
the crushing. In the language of the Sotho, it is called the scattering. The rise to power of the Zulu king Shaka and the Zulu kingdom at the start of the 19th century led to the deaths of between 1 to 5 million Africans.
That is actually true, a lot of them fled. In fact, I know people whose family are descended from those who fled from Shaka Zulu.
Thanks to this genocide and the enormous tide of refugees fleeing the advancing Zulu impis, much of the southwest
Shaka Zulu? Yep, Shaka Zulu, man.
was
The
underpopulated
Shaka
by
Zulu.
the time the Voortrekkers of the Cape Colony were searching for a new homeland.
I've met people who... Oh yeah, I just mentioned that. But I've actually met people whose ancestors were the ones who were fleeing Shaka Zulu.
In 1832, the first Boer scouts went into the interior to inspect the region that was then called Natal. After they returned and reported the land to be empty and fruitful, the first wagon trains began rumbling northwards. One of these, led by Pieter Retief, came in contact with the Zulu king Dingane in 1838, where they agreed that he would cede the region of Tugela if the Voortrekkers returned cattle stolen by another African tribe.
Oh, nice. This kind of reminds me of like a Skyrim quest. Hey, if you bring back those cows I stole, I'll give you this property. Alright, cool, quest added.
When this was done, Pieter Retief returned to
Hold on. Roommate agreement. No braaiing after 10 p.m. That's heresy right there. Everybody knows the fire gets started at 10 p.m. and then at 1 a.m. in the morning, that's when the cooking starts. Cattle are food, not friends. Based. PETA probably hates Afrikaners. Tribal dancing will be undertaken at an appropriate volume. Okay. Bible reading will be undertaken at appropriate volume. Alright, we can agree. The Boer leader will not be referred to as Pitiriti. The Zulu king will not be referred to as Ding Dang. I like this list. I like this.
to the Zulu king's kraal to sign the treaty, but instead he and his entire party were slaughtered. Dingane's impis, Zulu regiments, attacked the other parties following Pieter Retief at Blaukrans and Venen. During the
Betrayal.
attacks, 41 Voortrekker men, 56 women, and 185 children were murdered, but also around
Yeah, nobody remembers about this. Sad times.
300 black Basotho and Khoikhoi Afrikaans who had come along as servants. Those who took part in the Great Trek were a rather diverse bunch, none of whom was spared by the Zulus. Sometime after the Zulu attacks on Pieter Retief's groups, a few hundred Voortrekkers sent out a Vlugkommando, an armed group of horsemen, but they were defeated by the Zulus at the Battle of Italeni. Vlugcommando is an Afrikaans compound of the words vlug, meaning fast, and commando, which is where the modern English use of the word also comes from, following it being borrowed by the British after they fought against the Boers in the Boer Wars.
It literally means fast commando. Speedy Gonzala.
The English use of the word trek or trek is an arduous journey also comes from Afrikaans. Returning to 1838, the voortrekkers of other nearby parties were anxious to avenge their fallen comrades and pushed deeper into Zulu territory.
Bliksem vir blik. Ons sal hulle 'n pakkie slag gee. So for those of you guys who don't know, have you guys ever been slapped before? You know, like a good and then you guys have the next degree of comparison, the bitch slap. So in South Africa, we have several higher degrees of comparison for the magnitude of the slap. We've got the slap, and then, you know, and the Afrikaner sly, you know, that is like, you know, your ultimate omega slap. That is like something that you get when you see two titans in the face slap competition give each other good wallops. That's the type of sly right there. And then the buck sly is the one above that. You don't want to get that. There's one even higher than this, but that'll utterly destroy you and your future generations. And there's one even higher than that. So when it comes to degrees of comparisons, you guys have like 3. We've got like 5 or 6.
When the first covered wagons crossed the Buffalo River, a scout brought news of a large Zulu army that would soon be upon them. The voortrekker commandant, after whom the South African city of Pretoria is named, gave the order to form a lager, a ring of covered wagons with the pioneers and cattle inside.
So they're literally using the turtle formation, boys. Let's go, military tactics.
20,000 Zulu warriors attacked the lager for several hours.
20,000 boys.
But the voortrekkers held them back and killed 3,000 of them so that the river was coloured red with their blood.
I believe this is why they called it the Battle of Blood River.
The battle to this day is known as Die Slag by Bloedrivier, meaning the Battle of Blood River, and has become an important event for Afrikaner nationalism and the Afrikaner identity. The fact that a few hundred voortrekkers could hold out against 20,000 Zulu warriors without losing a single man, woman or child.
0 casualties versus 20,000, and they killed 3,000 of them.
Seemed like nothing short of a miracle to the Boers, who saw it as evidence that South Africa was indeed a land promised to them by God. In the 70s, the South
especially from like the 1900s down, Afrikaners were very, very uber religious, and I think especially a lot of the older folk were still like that.
African government erected a monument on the battlefield in the same place where in 1839 the Voortrekkers Lager had stood. Later on, a monument was also built for the Zulus who died, which is now also associated with Zulu nationalism. There is another monument in Pretoria, which is called the Voortrekkers Monument. The first stones of the monument were laid by the granddaughters of the Voortrekker leaders Andries Pretorius, Pieter Tief and Hendrik Potgieter in 1937. After the battle
I'm actually surprised at his ability to pronounce all of these words. Good props, good props.
of Blood River, the Zulu kingdom erupted in a civil war when the current king's brother rebelled against him with the help of the Voortrekkers. In the meantime, the Voortrekkers
Catch.
founded an independent republic which they named the Natalia Republiek after the British port city of Natal, which is called Durban today. Although the Boers finally had their autonomous republic, their Dutch roots were still clear to see in the colours and composition of their new flag. Despite this, the long arm of the British Empire seemed to be reaching northwards once more, which is why the Boers of Natalia were all too happy to accept the offer of protection by a Dutch merchant in 1842. In reality,
Dad's son. Oh, I actually wonder who the name of that Dutch merchant
the
was.
Netherlands hadn't been an important power on the world stage since the early 18th century, and had no footholds in Africa from where they could support the Boers against the British. When British troops invaded Natalia in 1842, no help came from the Netherlands. The Boers fought a small battle at Congela, although few casualties fell on either side, and the British capture of Natalia continued unhindered, and they renamed the territory to the Colony of Natal. The very reason for the Voortrekkers' great trek out of the Cape Colony had been to escape the iron grip of the British government, but now they were once again subject to British laws. The Boers' reaction was the same as it had been then, and the vast majority of Natalia's Boers packed up and trekked inland to found new republics between the Orange and Vaal rivers. This trek would also be full of hardship, as they would have to cross the Drakensbergen, meaning
Dragon Mountain Boys.
Dragon's Mountains in Afrikaans, with their wagons.
Boer
However,
did his
just as they had
research.
done in 1835, they reached their goal, and the survivors of the Great Trek founded the Boer republics of the
So they literally went on 2 tracks.
Oranje Vrijstaat, the Orange Free State, and the Transvaal, often also called Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek, meaning the South African Republic. Alright everyone, so this has been my little video on the Great Trek and a little bit of background about the Boers. So if you found this video interesting, then please do give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to know
Yeah, or
anything
give me a
else,
nice subscribe.
we have anything else to add, any fun information that you think I'd be interested in, then please do comment below, let me know, and I'll try and get back to you. Also, if you do like this kind of period in history, I've recently been doing a lot of research on it, then I think I'm going to make some more videos, maybe some stuff about the Boer Wars and some of the Boer tactics which they employed. Then I'm probably going to make some stuff about that in the future. So thanks very much for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
That was a good one, boys. Do we have any comments? I want to see the comments. Yeah, it's nice to learn about Afrikaner history. Baie dankie vir die accurate video. As part of our history slot, I know ignored. Yeah, a lot of the Boer history is basically just completely swept underneath the carpet by the current administration. As an Afrikaner, I appreciate the attention to detail, useful pronunciation, and colloquialisms. That is unironically something that I also had in mind while I was watching this. I'm like, yeah, this guy really tried his hardest, you know, to get all the correct pronunciations of everything. I'd love to see a video about Boer tactics. The history of South Africa during colonization, the Great Trek, is incredibly gripping. It's the history of 3 great empires colliding with each other in the unknown. The Dutch and British find themselves in an unexplored corner of Africa, ignorant of all its challenges and native people. The Zulu are forced to face a new enemy with weapons they've never seen before. With their military expansion now thwarted, I imagine that must have had quite the cultural impact on the Zulu. Suddenly they found themselves on the losing side of their culture of conquest and war. TLDR, 3 great empires, each of their own goal, thrown in the same place. Good times, yeah. It was a very interesting time in history. Yeah. I find it interesting how the Boers resemble American cowboys and pioneers. Yeah, pretty much. They didn't use Winchester repeaters, they used Furliers. That was a type of musket, true. Anyways, boys, we'll watch one more of these, since the fellow Boer, well, he's not South African, but he is a Boer who was born outside of Africa. He recommended these videos. They were pretty good. I like them. And now we're going to talk about the Boer War. Do you guys remember when I read that that extract about the Boer wartime doctrine and culture? This pretty much was a historical piece on the Boer Wars, which is the same time period as this. They were unironically holy crusades. The Boers were the last crusaders, boys. Who knows, maybe one day we'll go in crusading again.
Hello everyone, History with Hilbert here, and today I'm going to be talking about the Boer War. Now when I said the words Boer War, did you think about this? Or maybe this? Or perhaps even this? Well, congratulations my friends, you're thinking of the Second Boer War. But if we look at what it's called, the Second Boer War, then that implies that there was one before it. The First Boer War.
The Third Boer War. Hello, hey, Mush Potato, welcome, thank you so much for coming. We're busy learning about the First Boer War, a nice interesting history lesson that is, you know, hits close to home, being a Boer myself.
War. The Second Boer War was fought between 1899 and 1902, between the British and the various Boer republics. However, there was another war, the First Boer War, which was fought from 1880 to 1881. The First Boer War pit the British Empire against the independent Boer Republic called Transvaal by the British and the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek by the Afrikaners, as well as being supported by the Oranje Vrijstaat, the other Boer Republic in South Africa.
Yep, there was two.
But before we go any further, we need to have a look at some context.
Yeah, context. The Dutch, the British, and the farmers.
The Cape of Good Hope had been a Dutch refreshing station for VOC ships since the
Hello,
early
I saw the title, I knew I had to join. Well, you can blame Reaper Necros for that. He redeemed the changed title right before I even started streaming. You know, it was still during the stream is starting screen, so yeah, it's been up the whole stream.
18th century. But in 1814, with Napoleon on the rise in Europe, the British annexed the colony for themselves. However, the Dutch inhabitants...
Oh yeah, speaking of Napoleon, what was I gonna say? Ah, shoot, I forgot. I'll remember it later. You're welcome. Bleh.
of the Cape Colony were not huge fans of the British.
What do you mean welcome?
And decided to leave
Go away.
in what they called the
Sack.
Groot Trek, or the Great Trek in English. If you're interested, I've got a video about that you could watch. Leaving the British alone in South Africa with the native population and those whites who did decide to stay there. Meanwhile, the Afrikaners, the Boers, went into South Africa, into the hinterland, and they explored the place, opening it up for colonization, where they eventually founded the two Boer republics of the South African Republic and the Orange Free State. A quick note about their
Most of the land was empty, by the way.
names is that the Afrikaans names and the British names do differ slightly.
It's Boers, not Boers.
Now, in English, obviously, you have the Orange Free State, and in Afrikaans, or technically in Dutch, because it's hard to tell when Afrikaans begins and Dutch ends, so the official language in the Oranje Vrijstaat was actually Dutch, even though they were speaking Afrikaans, so it's a little complicated.
Yeah,
But
it's
essentially, the
a little hard.
Afrikaans name is the Oranje Vrijstaat, which means exactly the same as the Orange Free State. However, the other republic, the British were calling it the Transvaal. The Vaal was one of the rivers, and Transvaal was the area on the other side of the Vaal. However, the
The Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek. So, the ZAR is still kind of used today, especially with our currency. Like for the US dollar, it's shortened to USD, but our currency is still shortened to ZAR, which I think is Zuid-Afrikaan rands. So yeah, I think there's like one or two other places where you'll still find this. Like, I think South Africa is sometimes still shortened to ZA instead of SA.
The Afrikaners, the Boers, were calling it the Suid-Afrikaanse Republiek, shortened to ZAR, which meant the South African Republic.
Prelude to the war. Okay, let's go. Context hat time.
One trigger causing tension between the Boers and the British government in South Africa was certainly the discovery of diamonds in Kimberley in 1868.
Oh yeah, I've seen the you should see the giant hole that they have in Kimberley. It's huge.
And the subsequent diamond rush that brought lots of foreigners to the areas where the Boers were living. Now, the location of Kimberley is very important because Kimberley is actually on the border of the Transvaal, the Oranje Vrijstaat, and the British Cape Colony in South Africa.
So I assume the British wanted to expand their control to get hold of the diamonds.
All
Okay.
three of these independent entities were claiming
Mine
it
is
was
bigger.
part
But is it as good as Pixos?
of their territory, so this was certainly a cause of unrest between them. Now, at this time, of course, the British were playing the imperial game. Britain didn't have that many territories in Africa at the time. They had the Cape Colony in the very south of Africa, and then in the interior of southern Africa you obviously had the two Boer republics. But just to the west you had German Southwest Africa, which is now Namibia. You had the Portuguese in what's now Angola and Mozambique. The French were on Madagascar, and you even had the Belgians further north in the Belgian Congo. And the British were quite worried
You saw
that one of
Pixos
these
too?
nations,
No, I didn't.
if they didn't take over control of the Boer republics, would come down and take over. And obviously the British didn't want this. They wanted to get as much of Africa for their own and to stop the growth of other European powers.
Can you guys imagine in an alternate history timeline where the Boers ended up controlling the whole of like the Southern Africa and became a superpower like the USA? Except with like triple the resources.
Other European colonial powers in the region. The British do actually advance several times in South Africa. They move across.
It's like one of my favorite alternate history theories of what happens when we got a United States of Southern Africa Boer ethno-state. Very interesting.
In a previous video about the Great Trek, I mentioned how they annexed the
A book about that exists, yep. Definitely a fun idea to think about. Like, can you imagine World War II comes around and Germany is trying to push in and they get their cheeks clapped by the superior Aryans, the Boer Republic? I'll put a video about that and suggest. Oh, that would be awesome. That would actually be good. Like, can you imagine just how epic that would have been? Like, the funny Austrian painter mustache man is all about, his perfect Aryan race. Meanwhile, if you ever had to visit South Africa, he would see what one really looks like. Where everyone here is like 2 meters tall and they look like a pro wrestler. And even the 12-year-olds look like adults. Yep, he was going to see the real super soldiers in action. He probably would have lost World War II within the first year.
The Boer Republic
Cheeks
of
resoundingly
Natalia
clapped.
before the other two were formed, and the British of course also move up into the area of Kimberley after the Diamond Rush. A very direct cause of the First Boer War was the expansion of the Zulu kingdom under King Cetshwayo. Now the Zulus were...
And if I'm not mistaken, every male that was between the ages of 16 and 60, although it was often more and less, was able to fight in times of war. So even if you had something like a population like 60 million, you would basically have like 25 million soldiers ready at any moment's notice.
Were a very warlike tribe from the region that's now on the coast of South Africa, and just before the first...
So you're never invading that place. No, sir.
Boer War, you had the Zulu War. And before the Zulu War, the Zulus were causing quite a lot of trouble.
You become friends with Africa? You'd think that, but Boers hate socialism. So they would not be friends. Plus, they are like one of the most hardcore Christian ethnicities around.
Area where they were living, and the Boers were very scared, very nervous about the Zulu situation because they thought that the Zulus were about to invade their lands and to stoke up unrest between the native peoples who lived in the Boer republics. Now the British decided to act first, and in 1877 they annexed the Transvaal with the pretext of keeping it safe from the Zulus. Now of course the Boers weren't particularly happy with this, but at the end of the day, they'd rather have the British there than the Zulus. Soon after the annexation, the British declared war on the Zulus, and the Zulu War began. During the Zulu War, the Boers didn't really fight alongside the British, as they did feel they were being occupied, but they did help the British tactically and...
Right, so you... Jongens need to know about the horns of the buffalo.
Suggested fighting the Zulus defensively by building wagon forts which they called lagers, but all the British could hear was...
How Britain has fallen.
Then on the 22nd of January 1879, Isand Lawana happened.
Ooh, the music. Come on, Ingerland. Lachers? Lachers. Well, loggers, I technically think it's called, is basically when you basically put all your caravans in a giant circle and use that as a defensive position. Which is what happened with the Boers in the Battle of Blood River, where I think there was only like a couple of hundred Boers, and so... who were busy going on the Great Track, and so they just put all of their little wagons in a circle, and they had all the women and children on the inside, busy helping the men with ammunition supplies, and they fought off an army of 20,000 Zulus, and they won without a single casualty.
Although the British column was massacred at Isand Lawana,
unlike the British who got their cheeks clapped,
they managed to bounce back with reinforcements from the surface, and in the end they won the Zulu War. On the 20th of December, a British column en route from Pretoria was stopped by a Boer envoy who told Lieutenant Colonel Anstruster to turn him and his column back, stating that the Transvaal had declared independence and that marching any further would be a violation of its sovereign territorial rights. Anstruster refused and started to hand out ammunition. Moments later, at 12:30, the Boers
I always keep coming back to Roman British memes called, yeah, you do.
opened fire, and within 15 minutes, 156 of the British lay dead, and 122 who remained were captured. The Boers only lost 2 men.
You want to run that by me again? Hold up. How many losses?
Fire, and within 15 minutes, 156 of the British lay dead.
156 superiorly armed British people dead. Only 2 Boers dead.
And 122 who remained were captured. The Boers only lost 2 men during the
I don't know about you boys, but I think in RTS terms we call that cost effectiveness.
whole attack. The first engagement of the Boer War would be called the Battle of Bronkhorstspruit, after the little river that lay north.
Major skill issue, true. Giga chat, yep, absolutely true. These guys were warriors of note.
Far away. However, the Boers had already declared independence 4 days earlier, on the 16th of December. A rather funny story states that the war was caused because of a wagon. The British authorities wanted to commandeer Piet Bezuidenhout,
That's
the
KD,
Boers'
true.
wagon, for their own use.
Oh, you wanted to write Giga chat, but you were Giga Corp accident. All the British got Giga caught. Skill-based matchmaking in action, true. We are commandeering this wagon for Her Majesty's treasury. Oh, so that's an interesting theory that the war started because the British just wanted some wagon, and they ended up getting their cheeks clapped by having a whole regiment of like 250 soldiers get downed.
However, Piet was not very happy, and he soon came back with
Jy sal jou wat verbeel?
100 of his Boer friends, and
Yep. Wait, how many?
however, Piet was not very happy, and he soon came back with 100 of his Boer
So it was 100 versus about 250. And he lost 2 men, while the British lost 150 men. And they captured the other 120. I believe that is what we call a skill issue.
friends, and
This is like, Platinum League dudes busy fighting, freshly logins.
retook the wagon. The first shots were fired when the British tried to stop this from happening, although ultimately they failed. The British soon learned not to come between a Boer and his wagon.
True, do not come between me and my wagon, chat.
Boer republics had no real professional army like the British army that came to fight them.
Every man was a soldier. There was no army. You were the army.
Instead, every man from the farm would come and join what was called a commando, which is essentially a posse. Now, the men would be very good at shooting, and often the Boer marksmen were far superior to any in the British army,
Can we get some Giga Chads in chat for that, boys? Superior marksman.
as the Boers relied on their weapons to get any meat for the dinner table, so they knew that if they missed once, then the animal was gone, so they were trained to shoot once and hit every time.
Yeah, cool AF. True, thank you.
Really shows in the battles such as Bronkhorstspruit, where they inflicted huge casualties. Now as well, the Boers were mainly dressed in khaki and everyday clothes, which blended in with the African veld, as it's called, the field. Now as well, the Boers had been trained to use every bit of cover which they would use when hunting animals, so they were often very hard to detect for British forces, and they could blend
Superior
in
stealth.
with surroundings and use bits of cover that the British line infantry could not.
Oh yeah, they were just bright red.
The British, on the other hand, had not been trained at all with how to deal with guerrillas, and this infinitely they didn't. The British, on the other hand, had not been taught at all how to deal with guerrilla infantry. Some lessons really should have been learned after the American Revolution. As well, the British were still dressed in bright uniforms. The Highlanders still wore their kilts, and pretty much every regiment was still dressed in bright red, which obviously stands out like a
Since they are new to environment, they also have a tactical advantage. Yeah.
sore thumb against the South African landscape. The British also relied heavily on cavalry, which also wasn't a good idea when the people they were trying to chase were also on horses, had been in horses since they were born, had
That is true. I mean, I've been on a horse since I was a toddler.
lived pretty much all their life in the saddle, and were shooting back at them.
The war intensifies. Monkas.
From late December 1880, all the major British garrisons in Transvaal, Wakkerstroom, Standerton, Marabastad, Potchefstroom, Rustenburg and Leidenburg, all came under siege from Boer forces. The British saw this as the Transvaal Rebellion. Sir George Colley, a British general, assembled troops and a relief force in Newcastle in the Natal province, with the aim of going and relieving the beleaguered garrisons in the Transvaal. However, the British found their path barred by a Boer commando at a place called Laing's Neck. The Laing's Neck was a
By the way, you remember what they said about the commando? It's basically just a posse of random soldiers tossed together.
pass through the Drakensberg
Small group.
mountains, which the British force needed to get through to get to the interior of Transvaal. However, the Boers had occupied the heights around Laing's Neck, making
We had the high ground, chat.
it impossible for the British to come through. Now, the first thing that the British did to try and force the Boers off the heights was to open an artillery barrage. After the artillery barrage failed to send the Boers fleeing, they sent in the cavalry. The cavalry tried to charge, but they were driven back by accurate Boer fire from an opposite hillside.
Giga
And
chat.
again, the Boer marksmanship really does help. Meanwhile, the British were trying to advance towards the Boer positions on the heights, but once the British reached the top, they were fired on by Boer marksmen from an unseen trench, and they were forced to retreat. Now, the Battle of Laing's Neck is the last time that regimental colours were brought into battle by a British regiment,
Oh,
because
interesting.
in the Battle of Laing's Neck, 4 different officers were shot down by Boer marksmen trying to retrieve the colours.
360 no scopes, boys.
Finally, the British got the memo that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to have so many men recklessly and foolishly throwing their lives away to try and save the bit of cloth with the colours drawn on it. A short time after Laing's Neck, the British and the Boer commandos met again at the Battle of Schuinshoogte, and again the Boers were victorious and the British suffered many casualties. Now,
Good,
this
good.
led up to the final battle of the Boer War, the First Boer War, which was the deciding battle. And it pit again Sir George Colley's force, which was this time around 400 British infantry of the 58th, 92nd, and some Marines of the HMS Dido, against Generaal Nicolaas Smith's commando of around 400 Boer irregulars. Now, the final battle was called the Battle of Majuba Hill, which means the Hill of the Doves in Zulu. Now, a few things to cover before I go into the events of the battle is some of the basic geography of Majuba Hill. There are some points of interest, such as this, which is Gordon's Knoll, which is essentially a little bit that sticks out on top, as well as MacDonald's Kop, which is similar to
Hey, look, guys, it's a McDonald's head.
Gordon's Knoll and higher up on the mountain, easily defendable locations. Now, the British, after being defeated at Schuinshoogte and at Laing's Neck, they went to the top of Majuba Hill, again commanded by Sir George Colley, with the 92nd Gordon Highlanders securing the area between MacDonald's Kop and Gordon's Knoll, and the other regiments standing on the other side of the hill. Now, the Boers were encamped not very far away on the other side of Majuba. The Boers initially thought that the British were going to start shelling them with artillery, but when this didn't happen, they started to climb up the far side of Majuba Hill, unaware of the
It's like I'm watching an RTS battle IRL.
presence of the 92nd Gordon Highlanders. When they did find out that there was a regiment up there, a shootout started between the Boers and the Highlanders. Now, this shootout continued for a long while.
I can't believe the Brits still kept going even after they got 152. Even I am not that suicidal. I mean, to be fair, the British army was far, far larger than the Boer population, so they could easily, just replenish their numbers.
Although Sir George Colley didn't commit any more troops to it, and the Gordon Highlanders were at a severe disadvantage when they were fighting against the Boer marksmen who were trained to shoot and kill from long range. Now, the Boers, they made very good use of fire in advance, and at 12:45, Commando Ferreira's commando managed to capture Gordon's Knoll, which was only defended by a handful of Highlanders, forcing the other Highlanders back. The Boers
Just send lambs to the slaughter. True.
were some of the first people to employ the fire in advance technique, where one group of the commando would keep the enemy pinned down while another group crossed the open ground.
Which, by the way, this is used in modern military today. It's like killing floor. There's more of them than you caught. Yep.
Because, of course, while Majuba Hill wasn't a hill, there was not much cover in certain areas, especially the bit before Gordon's Knoll. So to counteract this and
strategy
to
all?
stop
True.
the Highlanders from
Well, they did have strategy, it just wasn't very good. Plus, their soldiers on an individual level were just far inferior to the average Boer marksman.
simply shooting all the Boers as they came across the open
I mean, they could probably aim, like, maybe within, like, 50, 60 meters and be accurate. Meanwhile, Boers probably had to shoot animals from, like, a kilometer away.
ground. One section of the commando would pin them down with accurate fire, while another section would storm across the open ground until they got to cover, until they had enough men on.
You're basically sending, like, 500 soldiers, like, with infantrymen, versus 500 snipers. I think we know who's going to win.
On the other side to capture Gordon's Knoll, which they did. Now, after this, the capture of Gordon's Knoll, the Boers, again, they have a second wave of attack, where they come around and attack the 58th Regiment. Meanwhile, other Boer forces move in and capture McDonaldskop, as well as sending in smaller parties to scale the much steeper side, who then engaged with the Marines of the HMS Dido. Now at this
Damn, they went against Marines.
point, the British are becoming surrounded, and the Boers, essentially, they come up on the heights and start firing down onto the British, who are on the plateau of Majuba Hill, at which point they really start to panic. And it's a really, George Colley was a very ineffective leader at this point,
Yep.
and the British were surrounded on every side by Boer marksmen, who literally at some points they just stood and shot at the British point blank, while they had no idea what was going on. Final stages of Majuba Hill is essentially the completion of the encirclement of the British by the Boers, and the pell-mell retreat down Majuba Hill, down the other side of the British after they were defeated. Now, Sir George Colley also met his end here. Several Boers claim to have killed Colley.
Wait, hold on. When this was over, I walked the 10 to 12 paces to the governor, where there were already 2 Boers and a colored person standing over him. When I reached the governor, I took his helmet by the pin and placed it over his face. Colley was dead. J.J. van Donder, Boer soldier.
Pas loop ek die 10 tot 12 tree na die gouverneur, waarbij dan nou al reeds
Wait, he's reading this in Afrikaans? Based.
2 burgers en een hotnot staan. Toe ek by die gouverneur kom, neem ek sy helm by die pen en lig dit van sy gezicht. Colley was dood. Die kool had door hem die helm en bo die rechteroog ingegaan en achter die linkeroor uitgekom. Ons was die dag onder bevel van generaal Joachim Ferreira.
Headshot, boys.
J.J. van Tonder, Boercommando.
And it's 360 no scope because they didn't even have scopes back in those days.
The Boers came to tend the British wounded. The British were amazed and not just a little bit humiliated by the fact that the Boers were pretty much all young lads, some just around.
Remember what I told you, boys? About 12-year-olds going to battle? Yep. Grown men got their cheeks clapped by a bunch of boys
14
in
or
middle
15
school
years old, with a lot of pensioners fighting alongside them. It's quite an interesting thing there that at Majuba Hill, the people who had inflicted this terrible defeat, this humiliating defeat on the British, a lot of them were just young lads and quite a few old grey faces. Already before Majuba there were peace talks underway, and it's actually thanks to the other Boer Republic.
These kids, yep.
Like the Orange Free State, the President Brandt, that he was the intermediate between the British and the Boers, and it was in
Why die when you can braai? True.
In 1881 that the Boers of the Transvaal, or the Suid-Afrikaanse Republiek, after the humiliating defeat of the British at Majuba Hill, signed the Pretoria Convention with the British Empire, which then basically said that the South African Republic had a right to exist and gave them their independence back as long as they and the Orange Free State recognised the Queen as the sovereign, but they were still essentially independent. So yeah, that's the first Boer War, or what I made of it at least. Please let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more. I'm going to make a few more videos about the Boers and South African history. Obviously there's the second Boer War, which there's a lot to talk about, as well as some extra little interesting ones that you might not have heard of. So I'm probably going to be returning to this topic at some point in the future. Let me know as well. I know some people have been asking if I could do this in Afrikaans. I can't actually speak Afrikaans. I mean, I did a little bit there, but that was me just reading. It would be an interesting challenge, though, to see if I could. But yeah, for now, this has been the History with Hilbert. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, thumbs up.
Actually, very good history lesson. Yeah, I did. Very, very few people, will cover the Afrikaner history. Like, sure, everybody's got the World War history, they got the Civil War history, they got this and that history. Hardly everybody ever covers this. Also, the Boer Wars were the first modern wars before even the World War One or the Great War.
Want to know anything else about it, then just leave a comment in the comment section below, and don't forget to tune in again next time for more History with Hilbert.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Hilbert.